The novel opens with a brief flash-forward of Bertie and Jeeves driving home, with Bertie remarking that there is an expression, something about joy, that describes what he has just been through. Jeeves helpfully supplies the phrase, "Joy cometh in the morning." Bertie proceeds to narrate the events that occurred. Jeeves wants to go fishing at the village of Steeple, Bumpali, but Bertie refuses because his fearsome Aunt Agatha and her second husband, the irascible Lord Worplesdon, lived there at Bumpali Hall. Bertie tries to make it up to Jeeves by buying him a gift, a new edition of the works of Spinoza. In the bookshop, Bertie runs into Florence Craye, Worplesdon's daughter and a serious, intellectual woman to whom Bertie was once engaged. Through a misunderstanding, she happily believes that Bertie is trying to improve his mind by reading Spinoza and her own book, Spindrift, causing him to fear that she will renew their engagement. Afterwards, Bertie sees his college friend D.R.K. Stilton, Cheesewright, who reveals he is engaged to Florence, much to Bertie's relief. Meanwhile, Jeeves has been consulted by Worplesdon on how to arrange a clandestine meeting with an American businessman, Chichester Clam. Without alerting the press, Jeeves suggested that Bertie rent a cottage, called Wee Nook, in Steeple, Bumpali, where the two businessmen can meet in secret. Bertie is incensed but calms when he learns there is a fancy dress ball and that his Aunt Agatha is away from Bumpali Hall. She does, however, instruct Bertie to pick up and deliver a brooch as a birthday present for Florence. Bertie drives to Steeple, Bumpali with his friend, Zenobia, Nobby, Hopwood. She is engaged to Bertie's friend George, Boko, Fittleworth, who lives in the village. Worplesdon, Nobby's guardian, does not approve of Boko and therefore has not consented to the marriage. On arrival, Bertie runs into Stilton, who is revealed to be a village policeman. Under the impression that Bertie is attempting to woo Florence, Stilton threateningly tells him to leave. Florence tells Bertie that she wishes that Stilton be an MP, but he has refused, causing tension in their engagement. At Wee Nook, Bertie encounters Florence's troublesome younger brother Edwin, a Boy Scout. As one of his daily acts of kindness, Edwin attempts to clean the chimney only to burn down the cottage after using gunpowder and then paraffin. Worplesdon blames Bertie for the fire and ruining his meeting place for Clam. He invites Jeeves to stay at the hall, leaving Bertie to lodge with Boko. Bertie discovers that he has lost Florence's birthday brooch, so he sends Jeeves to London to obtain a replacement. After welcoming Bertie to his cottage, Boko tells him his plan to win Worplesdon's approval. He will pretend to stop a burglar at the hall, with Bertie playing the role of burglar. Despite his misgivings, Bertie agrees. Before he can break in, Bertie is put off by the presence of Edwin. He then runs into Jeeves, who says that since Wee Nook has been burned down, Worplesdon and Clam plan to meet in the potting shed that night. Boko mistakes Clam for an intruder and locks him in the shed, enraging Worplesdon. When Worplesdon insists that the imprisoned Clam is not a burglar, Boko, unaware of the situation, heavily berates him, straining their relationship even more. Jeeves devises a new plan where Boko comes to Worplesdon's defense while Bertie insults him. But Bertie refuses. Edwin tells Bertie that Florence and Stilton have fallen out and that he found the original brooch and gave it to Florence. Florence confirms the engagement is over after Stilton criticized modern enlightened thought. Bertie tries to reason with her, but instead she kisses him, believing that he is being selfless and that the brooch was a present from him, and renews their engagement. Much to his horror, Boko, once engaged to Florence himself, agrees to disclose how he got out of it if Bertie insults Worplesdon. Jeeves, however, discovers that Boko alienated her by kicking Edwin. Bertie does the same. But Florence ends up approving as Edwin had messed up her scrap album. Nobby promises Bertie to show Florence a letter in which he criticized her if Bertie insults Worplesdon. Bertie visits his uncle's study. But before the plan can proceed, Boko is escorted from the grounds by a gardener after Worplesdon discovers him hiding in the garden. Worplesdon receives Bertie warmly after hearing he kicked Edwin, something he'd wanted to do for years, and takes Bertie into his confidence. Jeeves advises that Bertie suggests to Worplesdon that he and Clam meet in disguise at the fancy dress ball to take place that night. Worplesdon to wear the Sindbad the Sailor costume that Bertie had brought for himself. Boko drives to London to buy himself and Bertie new costumes but brings back the wrong bag. Jeeves steals Stilton's police uniform for Bertie so he can attend the ball and persuade Worplesdon to approve Nobby marrying Boko. Worplesdon's negotiations with Clam are successfully concluded by the time Bertie arrives. Worplesdon warms to Boko when he hears that he has also kicked Edwin and will shortly be starting a job in Hollywood, 6,000 miles away. He approves the marriage. The next morning, Stilton arrives to arrest Bertie for stealing his uniform, but Boko reminds him that he needs a warrant. When Bertie tries to flee, he discovers that Worplesdon has been accidentally locked in Boko's garage overnight. Worplesdon emerges furious with Boko and withdraws his approval of the marriage. Worplesdon is horrified, however, when Jeeves informs him that Aunt Agatha, who disapproves of all fancy dress balls, has returned unexpectedly and wants to know where Worplesdon has been. Jeeves suggests that Worplesdon say he spent the evening discussing the wedding plans with Nobby and Boko, then slept at Boko's cottage overnight. Worplesdon agrees, consenting to the marriage again. Stilton returns with a warrant but Worplesdon gives Bertie a false alibi. Nobby informs Bertie that Edwin has destroyed the insulting letter that Bertie wanted her to show to Florence. Stilton resigns from the police force in disgust at Worplesdon's underhanded behavior, which causes Florence to reconcile with him to Bertie's delight. Bertie prepares to face his Aunt Agatha with Worplesdon, but Jeeves confesses that he lied about her returning Uddharan Chennai with no reason to stay. The pair escape from Steeple Bumpali by car. Bertie tries to remember an expression which he feels sums up recent events. Something about joy, but notes that he already narrated all this before.